because I had two different groups of people come up to share with me that there are a bunch of wood storks in the duck ponds, which is awesome. You're always welcome to slow me down to tell me about bird sightings. I appreciate it. But, what do you have?
I have one, an eagle swooped in over the top of me with my horse yesterday in Live Oak Forest.
Yes, I need to send an email out to all of the people that can see eagles from their yards, because the fledglings are about to happen, or they're happening now. We've seen some flying young birds that look like they're fresh out of the nest, and we want to keep track of that. So it's clear spring is here, things are getting going full speed. The wood storks are in force on the island, they're feeding. It's time for nesting to start. They're a little behind because it's been so cold, and now it's not. I don't know if you noticed. Well, it is again, right? My throat's a little scratchy because of the thing I want to talk about tonight, which is my yellow car. And your yellow car. So it is pollen season in the Low Country, and it visually is pine pollen season in the Low Country. And on Spring Island we have how many species of pines? 6. Good. There's our Master Naturals graduates. 6 species. On some parts of the island we're dominated by slash. Some parts have mostly longleaf, which I hope you're going to help us plant on Tuesday morning. And then loblolly is really the one that's most numerous around the island. And they are dumping pollen right now. Why are they doing that? There is actually some deep history to talk about here. Pines have been around for a mere 400 million years, which means that pines are part of the gymnosperms, which are older than flowering plants as a group. Flowering plants disperse their pollen by insects. Whether they're being honest or dishonest with their pollinators, they're finding ways to bring insects and hummingbirds and other stuff. But pines don't do that. They are 100% wind dispersed pollinators. So the female cones popped out on the new growth that came out this winter on the pines, and the cones for the male side on the same tree are from last year's growth. And those have now started releasing clouds and clouds of pollen, hoping that some of the pollen lands on a female cone, right? So if you're doing that, you gotta just dump pollen everywhere and hope for the best. And that's what's happening. So the breeze knocks the pollen loose. Some of it lands on a female cone, most of it misses. So it lands on everything else. 80% of it lands on my eyes. My contacts are not staying there very well. But per tree, there can be several pounds of pollen released in the course of the season. I don't think that surprises any of you. If you looked at an individual grain of pollen under a microscope, it would look like Mickey Mouse with 2 large sacs above the typical looking pollen grain. Those are empty sacs to catch the wind and aid dispersal. So they fly everywhere. They've been found 2,000 feet in altitude, and they've been found many, many miles offshore because it just blows everywhere. The sacs make it float on water, which you've also noticed, because anytime you found a puddle, there's a yellow film on it. But the cool thing is it can be a source of carbon for ecosystems. In one study, a pine pollen was 20% of the year's carbon added to a lake floor. So it actually has some role beyond just the pollination. There is actually debate about how much allergens come from pine pollen. People blame goldenrod, but goldenrod in the fall is not the problem. Goldenrod blooms at the same time as ragweed and other things. It could be that that's what's going on with pine pollen. It clearly irritates eyes and sinuses, but is it causing full allergen reactions? That's not actually clear. So there's a little science as you go and leave footprints across your front porch tonight and complain about the yellow goo everywhere. All right, so I'm really pleased to introduce our speaker tonight. Georgann Eubanks has traveled from North Carolina to be with us. Tonight she's going to be talking about a recent book called The Fabulous Ordinary, Discovering the Natural Wonders of the Wild South. She's an Emmy-winning documentarian and writer. She has done a lot of things in the arts. She's a graduate from Duke University, where she received a public policy studies degree and then used that, as one does, to publish poetry, make documentaries, write about fiction, write about nonfiction, write about food, write about history, write about literature, and of course writing about nature. She has very local roots here that actually precede her birth. Her father was stationed in Parris Island, and she has been returning to the Beaufort area for a long time and has some great connections here, and we're really pleased to have Georgann Eubanks with us tonight. Welcome, Georgann.
How's my audio? It's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Chris Marsh got this going, and we met in Winston-Salem. He was assigned to MC a book talk I gave, and we hit it off. And nobody's ever been nicer to me at book talk than Chris was. He liked this book, and he told me about Spring Island, and introduced me to Andy Jones, and then Mara Cripps, and Winky and David, who are my hosts, and Lisa Gravel and Mike Garcia. Everybody's been taking care of Donna Campbell and I. Donna is the photographer for this book and a video producer for public television. This is our 6th book with UNC Press in more than 20 years. But I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, and since I'm preaching to the choir, it seems appropriate to have an invocation. The book we have the most of tonight is this poetry book that came out along with The Fabulous Ordinary this year. And this is a poem about my grandparents and why I care about plants. And I know all of you do, and you probably had grandparents who cared about plants, or somebody in your family. So I'm going to share this with you as a kind of invocation before I do the talk. This is called Their Gardens. Now I am the keeper of the crab apples along the roadside, the boxwoods that line the drive, the azalea and camellia in the pine straw beds beside the tulip tree. I am the keeper of the liriope, of ajuga in shade, the variegated aucuba, the snowball bush of boutonnieres, caladiums nodding in boxes along the stoop. I am the keeper of her clematis that climbs the trellis beside the garage, the fragrant moonflowers that cling to the screened porch siding, and the bank of gardenias beyond. I am the keeper of the hybrid tea roses in the full sun bed, the coral honeysuckle that climbs by the pines, his peach and plum trees that she would not spray, the quince by the picnic table, the hydrangea and spirea. I am the keeper of the necklace of poppies, the daffodils that lined each ledge, the horsetail near the basement door, the sweet tea olives and summer begonia. I am the keeper of the catalpa and its caterpillars for bait, the mulberries held in purple-stained fingers, the muscadine and scuppernong tunnel beside the rows of sweet potatoes that he dug in the fall. I am the keeper of the daylilies, the bass and brim, the tadpoles and bullfrogs bellowing in our dreams, the lonely pear by the pond that always ripened late. I am the keeper of my people and their plantings, the land sold for mansions, the landscape only memorized. I am the last among the flourishing. I appreciate what you all have done here. It's very powerful. And this book, The Fabulous Ordinary, came as a part of a process. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a botanist, I studied public policy. I'm a writer. And so this book, it's not moving. This book has a trailer, and I want to share that with you to give you a feel for The Fabulous Ordinary. And this is some of Donna Campbell's handiwork, and she can answer questions at the end of the presentation as well. Hunting Island. Lightning boats. Thank you, Donna. Hopefully that'll whet your appetite for the spectacles that we saw across 7 states of the South. We were looking for sites where ordinary but spectacular things happen in a reliable way in nature. And this is a book for parents and grandparents or groups of friends who want to be amazed by the natural world. But before I get into that book, I just thought it would be appropriate to tell you a little bit about the journey to get to this book, which is my own journey to understand the wonders of the South and the toll that humans take on our environment. So we did 3 books that were commissioned by the North Carolina Arts Council about literature in North Carolina. We developed tours that people could take and read segments, excerpts from North Carolina writers' poems, novels, biographies, history, and so forth. And we did these 3 books, and it took 10 years. We ruined 2 cars, we wore out 2 cars, and by the time we got to the end, we were pretty tired, so we took a year off. But we had gotten so excited about the idea of taking people on tours, of being tour guides, that we finally came around and said, well, we got to do something next. What shall we do next? We decided to eat our way across North Carolina. The idea started with a fig that I planted on the south side of my condo in Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and I realized how ephemeral this fruit was. You know, 3% of the figs that are eaten in the world are fresh. Most people eat dried figs because they just don't last. You can't ship them. You can buy them in the grocery store for a very narrow window. And I loved that about my childhood, that my grandparents served me foods that they grew themselves and that were only available in a certain season, and we looked forward to it. And so nothing triggers memory like smell and taste, right? So I tried to come up with edible memories, 12 foods in North Carolina that people have to wait for and look forward to. We started with snow cream in January. Because what else can you do but snow in January, right, in North Carolina? And the farther you go east in the state, the crazier people get when it snows. And so there are all these recipes to study and people to talk to about their favorite way to eat snow cream. We had 12 different foods, but as we went through and did this study, we met Murray Bridgers, who is a heroic crabber who kept North Carolina restaurants and crab fans in soft shell crabs in May for decades. Murray's no longer with us, but he was an astonishing man to me. The crabs would high-five him when he would walk by the shutters, you know. And his daughter is now running their $1 million business on the Outer Banks. The inset picture here is a Vivian Howard dish with ramps draped over the crabs, and ramps are also another one of the foods that the Cherokee grew for 3,000 years and eat, and now they're being poached by people who are selling them to chefs at $20 a pound in New York. So there started to be something I understood here, that we were in trouble, that some of these foods are in danger. And in fact, when Donna and I began to look for native wild-caught oysters from North Carolina, we had to drive about 400 miles before we found, all along the coast, before we found a restaurant that actually was selling wild-caught oysters from North Carolina. Stormwater runoff, boat traffic, poor septic systems, climate change has all affected our precious native oysters and the crabs. And so, yes, farm-raised oysters have new promise for us, but even they are subject to poor water quality. So I said, gosh, I guess our next book might be about endangered species. And so we did a book called Saving the Wild South. And actually we decided to stick with plants. And we picked 12 plants across 7 states of the South that are endangered or are they're important plants to endangered species of animals. So for example, river cane is not endangered, but it is habitat for some mammals that really need it. So much a part of our identity and culture as Southerners in particular, and it may be true other places, but I'm speaking from my own experience. When we lose a species, we lose a part of our identity and culture. And this book taught me how much I could learn from folks who are out there in the field working to save these endangered plants. The cover is the shoal spider lily. It's a rocky shoal spider lily. It grows in Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina. This is the Catawba River south of Charlotte at the Lansford Canal State Park, which is Lancaster County, South Carolina. 22 acres of flowers that bloom in May, unless Duke Energy releases too much water from the impoundments upstream. These lilies are extraordinary, and you can canoe through them, and their fragrance is gorgeous. But 2 weeks after Donna took this picture, 100,000 gallons of raw sewage flowed into the river just above Charlotte. You can find them on the Broad and Flint rivers in Georgia, and the Cahaba River and some tributaries in South Carolina. This is the lily, whoops, what happened? This is the lily up close, and I love these flowers. They're a poem unto themselves. They bloom 1 bloom a day, so you can see yesterday, today, and tomorrow right here. It's worthy of a poem. The first time we went to see them in Alabama on the Cahaba River, the water was too high, so we had to go back another time, and we got close to them. The little town of West Blockton, Alabama has adopted the lily as their identity, and they have a festival every year and invite people to come. And this is a tiny town that mines coal and has not much going on, although the former mayor celebrated her 103rd birthday today, and I wished her happy birthday on Facebook. This is the town flag. It's led to ecological consciousness and some economic development for the town because they invite people to come and bring their lounge chairs and sit in the shallows of the river and admire the lilies. A Stanford University biologist tried to make the flower, or to nominate a flower for the endangered species list, but when you take a legislator out to see the lilies in bloom, they don't believe they're endangered. So instead they got a federal permit to protect that part of the river, because when people learned that this was potentially an endangered species, they went and started pulling up the lilies and taking them home. Well, they only grow on moving water on rocks, so they don't grow in a bucket at your house, right? This is LaTanya Scott, and she's the environmental educator for the Cahaba River Society, and she works with younger children to help them get acquainted with the river and its treasures. And she met a student who came to her and said he grew up in the heart of Birmingham, and he had never touched a tree until he went on her canoe trip. And of course, historically, among people of color, people who were enslaved and their descendants, who had a deep well of knowledge about botany, still have the stigma attached to the dangers of water from their trauma of being drowned. The Cahaba River Boys was the group that bombed the Birmingham church, and that's the name of the river. So there's a lot of cultural stuff to overcome for certain communities with this flower. But the other thing I learned, and many of you may know about plant blindness, it's a condition that was named by a couple of botanists from the American South. They said most people in developed nations now tend to see plants as merely a green, blurry background for the animals and human-made objects that populate the visual field. It was 10 years before plants were even added to the endangered species list. It started out just being animals, but when they put the plants on the list, there were 3,000. We don't even know how many species we haven't discovered, especially when it comes to plants. Some people have said 20% are still undiscovered. So these researchers asked high school students at graduation some questions, and 77% of them had never grown a plant by themselves, high school students. 10% had never picked fruit from a tree, or could they remember a children's story that featured a plant? And I realized that, we're in trouble if kids don't appreciate nature. Don't get out in nature. You know the drill about digital attachment and our obsession with screens. But academic departments now in universities in botany and horticulture are diminishing, are being merged, are not being funded. I met a remarkable young man at Auburn University who's gone on to become a botanical star. He was the only kid in his class that was a botany major at Auburn. What? We're in trouble. So came this idea for the next book. To invite people to pay attention to regular natural happenings that are fabulous. And this cover of the book is Lake Murray, outside Columbia, South Carolina, where 250,000 purple martins in the month of end of June, most of July, come and roost on a single island in Lake Murray. It's called Bomb Island. It's where they tried to practice dropping ordnance during World War II. And it's become a tourist attraction. And now that people will take you out on pontoon boats and you can wait till sunset and see the birds come in. And there's more and more and more. And we were just giddy at this site. It was so fantastic. And these are the kind of spectacles that kids and grandparents and parents should enjoy together. We have to love nature to save it. So this is a sort of an overview of the scope of this project, the places that we went. And some of the chapters are do-it-yourself, so you can do it at home. You can attract moths at home without any expense. You can look for lightning bugs. You can listen for owls and frogs. But I'm going to give you a few chapters here tonight to think about. When we were coming back from research for Saving the Wild South, a member of the Florida Native Plant Society said, "Oh, you're headed back to North Carolina. It's Valentine's Day. The trout lilies are blooming in South Georgia in this one place. You must go see them." And so we called a volunteer in Whigham, Georgia, and she agreed to meet us on a Sunday morning to come see this 30-acre plot of land that had recently been saved. And we got there and it looked a lot like this, which was interesting, but it was as the sun continued to rise and the ground warmed up, it began to look like this. They bloom at Valentine's Day each year, more or less. They usually, now trout lilies, may occur much farther north and later in the year. But this expanse was discovered by a couple of botanists when the highway department was about to widen the road, and they said, "We think y'all should come look at this." And the land was going to become a subdivision. But it did not become a subdivision. And this is an area of rural Georgia that used to celebrate spring with an annual Rattlesnake Roundup, where guys went out and captured or killed rattlesnakes to show off on a special weekend in the spring. And they pour gas into endangered gopher turtle holes and get the snakes to come out and then collect them. And well, now they celebrate Rattlesnake Roundup, but they do it as an educational program and talk about how rattlesnakes need to be protected. And they celebrate the lilies. And the local restaurants and gift shops stay open extra hours in this really remote part of Georgia, and it's become, again, an identity for the community. They put up these banners in Little Wiggum, and they sell sparkleberry hiking sticks for people, and it's just become a wonderful story, but you have to read the book to find out how they raise the money. Another thing that influenced the creation of this book is a very popular event. Well, I shouldn't say popular because a lot of people don't know about it, but one of the last dark places on the East Coast is in eastern North Carolina, near the Pocosin Wildlife Refuge. And thousands and thousands of tundra swans and snow geese migrate to this spot on the first full moon in December, and they stay until the first full moon in February. They're not nesting, they're just having a party. And it's noisy, and it's fascinating, and they eat about 20% of the grain that the farmers plant, but they're prepared for that because they love these birds. And the Navy wanted to put a practice landing strip in this area so they could take off jets morning, noon, and night, 24 hours a day, practice takeoff and landing, and the local people stopped the Navy from acquiring this land so the birds could come. It's quite a sight. We also went to the Okefenokee, and I met somebody tonight who's from there, from Waycross. Yes, ma'am. And we saw 16 alligators in one place. I did not get out of the car. Donna got out of the car, and she got their best photos. Nothing between us and the alligators, but we met some great researchers and learned a lot about them. And then this is a do-it-yourself chapter. I met this Georgia biologist, Erin Cork, who works for the Department of Natural Resources, and she loves frogs and snakes. And she finally got to the point in her career that she could buy a house, so she got a real estate agent, and the agent said, you know, you don't have a very big budget, but I've got a place I'll show you. It may not smell too good, it's near a water treatment plant. It's kind of boggy, and she said, oh, good. It's now her personal laboratory. But she when they got to the property, Erin saw this little spade-foot toad on the back step of the deck. And she then immediately ran around the yard, and the real estate agent was standing on the porch going, do you want to see the house? This is the eastern spade-foot toad. Impudent, whiny. Erin has all these great metaphors to teach how frogs sound. So this one is the eastern narrowmouth toad, and she said, this, if you get to a wet place and there are a bunch of these, they sound like a bus full of sheep. So I realized that I could make this into a chapter that you could do if you had a wet place in your yard, or you have, you know, it rains and you find a place and you hear frogs. You can listen for them in your own backyard, and there are great resources online to match the sound to what you're hearing. So I made a recording. This is the bioretention pond in my backyard, and I made a recording and I sent it to Erin, and she had identified 3 species. sentinel species, and they're sounding the alarm, the green frogs, and if it's rained and it's warmish outside, you should hear frogs that the ecosystem is healthy, right? So you learn something. This is a great thing to do with kids. And we went to Florida. I realize now we could have just come to Spring Island. But we went to Florida because I'd never seen a river otter. And this was a warmer destination. It was a very satisfying chapter. The Itchitucknee River is in the sandhills of north central Florida. It's fed by 9 named springs and some unnamed springs. It's 5.5 miles long, and we were told that there was a good chance we'd see river otters. The water temperature is about 72 degrees year-round here, and so we reserved a canoe, and the park ranger agreed to take us he was in the kayak, we were in the canoe. At 8:30 in the morning, nobody else was on the river at this morning in April. There's Sam. Now, Donna and I were going down the river sideways in our canoe because we were arguing about who was steering. And she was trying to get her camera ready. But he was very patient, as you can see. His father was a ranger before him, and he's done this for 29 years. Great guy. So this is the famous blue hole where 233 million gallons of water are pumped daily. And it's 100 feet long and 25 feet wide, shaped like a jug, and the depth of the water below us is about 45 feet, and people scuba dive into this hole. This is part of the limestone karst landscape in Florida. The landscape is like Swiss cheese, right? Well, this was so gorgeous, and we got to see it. And then, as we're heading on down the stream, a black-crowned night heron sort of led the way for us, which was exciting. And there it is. Donna, good pick. Hope you're feeling the flow here. We're relaxing and getting more excited, hoping to see the river otters, but Sam says, can't promise. Here's the thing about this river. This is the point, now we got to the point in the river where tubing is allowed, and this is near the University of Florida at Gainesville. So lots of activity used to happen here, including phosphate mining and other human invasions. They cut all the cedar trees here to make pencils, and the river now is a rite of passage for teenagers and college students in inner tubes, and they actually supply the inner tubes. They're very strict. You can't take a plastic bottle of water. You can't take anything with you on the river, but you can put your fanny in the water, even though there are some alligators. That's why we picked a canoe. 250,000 visitors on the water every year, and this is Sam's job to keep the river safe. No litter. They police it very vigorously. So there is no trash. We could see mullets swimming along beside us. In the old days, cows used to get into the river. People dynamited fish, that's how they caught fish, and then cooked them right on the bank. Field hands harvested tobacco. People bathed in the river, and human disturbance was everywhere, but that's changed. We moved into the bird area, and just quickly, here's a beautiful osprey that was watching us as we went under him. Of course, a jet black anhinga trying to dry its wings in the sunshine, our villain bird. And then this is a juvenile ibis, and swamp lettuce at its feet. This plant can be invasive, by the way, when the water levels are low enough, though, that manatees can eat it, but they can't come up when the water level is too low. Great bird pictures. This is a South American limpkin. Anybody heard of a limpkin? They're now migrating into Florida. In the 50s, the writer Marjorie Canaan Rawlings, who wrote The Yearling, Cross Creek, she shot one and served it for dinner at her home. She didn't realize the species was declining, and so she pulled out her .22 rifle, dropped the bird, and then she waded up to her waist in the water in the company of a water moccasin. to retrieve it and declare the bird most delicious, but when she learned about its status, she didn't shoot another one. But we felt lucky to see one. And of course, the turtles, the cooters, the yellow-bellied sliders, and some alligators swimming along. I would not want to be in an inner tube. The wood ducks, love these pictures from Donna, and this is one of my favorites. And we finally reached the floodplain, which is the last section of the river in the park boundaries, and here the banks seem lower and nearly at water level. It's like a cypress knees and gigantic trees. It's a cathedral. It was just gorgeous. And so we watched Sam. He seemed to be studying the shoreline, and we thought, well, maybe, are we going to see the otters? Maybe this is the place. And he sees a head pop up. So that was pretty exciting. Evidently, the parents were trying to lead us away from their young, and they had a hole underneath, like a little cave underneath the water. These animals have a very good sense of, not so good sense of eyesight, but a good sense of smell when they're above water. Their whiskers are very sensitive, and they're attuned to prey even if the water's cloudy. So we followed the parents across the river, and the swimming commenced, and we got to this little place, and we pulled up close to the shore, and I'm holding us, and Donna's saying, where are they, where are they? And we suddenly saw them poking up. And Donna said, are they going to come turn over the canoe? Like puppies. Finally, one came up to eat its catch, which was crayfish or crawfish. This is kind of like the old joke at the dinner table, what are you eating? And you open your mouth and go, ski food. Crunch, crunch. We could hear them crunching. We were that close. And then she shows us her empty mouth. And then there's a little confrontation between the turtle. She turns to sniff at the turtle, and the turtle is offended. So that was the end of our drama, but we could have watched for hours, and Sam was very pleased, and we were thrilled that we had a successful trip. April in Florida. So one more story, and this was the first chapter we went for, January in Alabama, to see the sandhill cranes at Lake Wheeler Wildlife Refuge, and if you have a chance to go in January, don't miss it. This is a 35,000 acre refuge on the Tennessee River, built during the WPA, and nowadays 20,000 sandhill cranes take up residence here for a few weeks every January. I've never seen a sandhill crane. Now I've seen them since, and I'll never forget what they sound like. They're one of the oldest living bird species in the world. Prehistoric cranes from 10 million years ago have been found in fossil beds in Nebraska. Tennessee is sort of the easternmost border of the flyway, and these are big birds. They stand 3 to 5 feet tall, wingspan of 5 to 6 feet, and the red top of their head is not feathers, it's skin, and that's the blood in their head. And when they get excited, which they are at Lake Wheeler, believe me, the rush of blood makes them redder. So we're watching this scene. We're near a major highway. We're between Huntsville and the Redstone Arsenal, and this wildlife refuge is between the two, and there's a noisy truck that comes by, and you'll hear it a little ways into this. Truck. They're paying attention, but they're still partying. And Donna took this picture at a different spot. We were right up against a wooden wall that was built as a photographer's blind, with little windows so you could stick your telephoto through the window, and in the early morning and late afternoon, the cranes are there feeding. And it was just, we were just riveted. And suddenly, after about an hour of watching, one of the experienced photographers, and there were several there, stepped back from the wall and said, "I've seen a whooper." We're like, "What?" A whooping crane. Whooping cranes, of course, are critically endangered. There's something like 650 on the planet. And I suddenly remembered 4th grade reading My Weekly Reader. How many of you read My Weekly Reader? And extinction to me was such a scary word, and there was a whole story about whooping cranes. So this is what they looked like coming through. See the big white guy in the middle with the bustled tail? This was so exciting. My eyes welled up, and I came home and I looked it up. In 1964, there were 42 cranes, whooping cranes in the wild. Only 42 that people could count. And it was in that year of 1964 that an injured crane was picked up by some scientists. It was a young whooping crane found in Canada, saved by the biologist, and he would never have been able to fly south with his parents. They named him Canis for Canada, US. And they took him to Maryland. In 1966, Canis had become a sperm donor for endangered species propagation in Maryland. It was an experiment. And by 1976, the year I graduated from college, there were 69 whooping cranes. Propagation science and conservation efforts were getting better. Canis was being very productive. And at the time of his death in 2003, there were 420 whooping cranes in the wild, 10 times the number at the time of his capture. And we later learned, through interviewing folks at Wheeler, that all of the whooping cranes you see here are Canis descendants. They have the bands on their legs. Their radio, that some of them had radios on them, but their batteries have long since died. But these were all from that original Canis whooping crane. So the rest of the story is that My Weekly Reader ceased publication in 2012. But I also found evidence online, God bless Google, that there were kids who had become environmental activists because of reading that story in My Weekly Reader. I read about a STEM teacher in Illinois who had been impressed, and an Alabama man who started an international nonprofit to help whooping cranes. So we need My Weekly Reader again. So I commend to you, as Rachel Carson did, to plant some seeds by taking young people to see some of the sites you all have around you and in this book, and to really be aware of how much it matters that we teach young kids about this. If you have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Where do you find lightning bugs?
I found a lot of kinds of lightning bugs, and there's a wonderful book now that is kind of a field guide to lightning bugs, and there are more species than you think. But I found them in the Blue Ridge Mountains on my own property that I've owned for 30 years. And until I went on a tour, I didn't know to look for them. Congaree, exactly. And there are ones that flash high in the trees, and there are blue ones that leave their lights on for a minute and fly low. There are all kinds of lightning bugs out there. And I bet this is a great place to look for lightning bugs. No? No?
Shoppingly.
Huh. Well,
We do have some.
okay. Yes, ma'am.
If you scuba dive in the blue hole, what's down there?
Well, it's real pretty. You know, I'm not a scuba diver, but the caves are pretty amazing. The sad news is that they did a study to examine where stormwater from Lakeland or some town near Gainesville ends up, and it ends up in the Blue Hole. So that's a concern. Other questions? Yes?
So did you have to make special arrangements to go to the places that you visited, or are they all readily available to all of us?
Well, I think, you know, for example, the Itchitucknee trip, you could go and make a reservation, and if you're a decent paddler, you probably see what you see. We made some special arrangements because we had a finite schedule and a finite budget. And frankly, you know, to do 12 places, there's no financial support from the press. I mean, there's a little bit, you know, this is academic publishing. So we try to build our trips to coincide with opportunities to speak to groups and sell books. And so we have to be scheduled. But I think most everything in the book you can do. There were a couple, when we went to see the Dismalites in Alabama, which are glowing gnat larvae on the sides of caves. Anybody can go there, but you do have to make a reservation, and they only are available in May and October. So, but if you're determined, you can do it.
Don't go there.
What should we not miss on Spring Island?
Well, I'm getting my nature tour tomorrow. But I think you should just not miss Spring Island. I mean, you guys have a lot to teach the world about the value of this conservation and what you have saved and preserved. I love the rookery. We have wood storks and roseate spoonbills that we went to see near Aiken, South Carolina. And this is a funny story. So the Audubon Silver Bluff Preserve was created to preserve quail. And then the Savannah River plant started having wood storks come to their cooling ponds at the nuclear reactors. And they called up Audubon and said, can you guys do something and get these wood storks to not come to our nuclear plant? So they put fish in the ponds and lowered the levels at a certain time of year, and the storks come, and they come for an event called Storks and Corks, where nice donors come and have a glass of wine and nice food, and the storks have nice food, and then they all get together and observe each other. Just saying. So, photography, incredible. Donna. Facebook tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I'll be around.
A couple of quick things. Itchitucknee Springs, 3.5-hour drive from here. I went in November, saw river otters. Great spot. It's really a cool, easy place to go kayaking. And then if you're interested in any of the books, they're for sale in the back. Credit card or member charge, either one you want to do, and you'll sign them?
I'll sign them, and we'll mail you one if we run out. No postage charge.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.